Yo! Welcome back to One More Mana. My name's Derek, and today, if I seem a particularly little extra excited today, it's because I am, because we are taking a trip to Phyrexia for today's deck tech. Before I get too far into it, again, I say this like at least once every 2 or 3 videos. Go down to our affiliate link below and just buy every Infect card. A lot of them are pretty cheap. Start throwing them into decks. Might lose you some friends, but it'll take you one step closer to Phyrexian perfection. That's what really matters. But either way, even if you're not interested in Infected, you are one of those people. Still, go ahead, click on that affiliate link down below with TCG Player. TCG Player is absolutely amazing. You're going to be able to find any cards at all that you want on there. Any type of foil versions, full art versions, whatever you're looking for, TCG Player has it. Any cards you get with that link will go ahead, support the channel, and help us to get out more and better content. We really, really do appreciate the help. Now, getting back into the Phyrexian party that is today's deck tech. If y'all don't already know, I love Phyrexia, and I love Infect. It just makes me happy. It is one of my favorite things about Magic. For anyone who's not familiar with Infect creatures, they deal their damage as poison counters. When a player gets to 10 poison counters, they are dead. They're choking on poison. They're done for. And for some people, they don't like that because that number wasn't increased at all in Commander. It's still just 10 poison. But it's just so interesting to me the variety of ways that Infect can be used in Commander. I've done some deck techs on, Infect focus decks as well as using it as an alternative win con. That's probably the most common way people are exposed to Infect. It's through cards like Triumph of the Hordes and Tainted Strike. And it's just like one card in an otherwise normal deck that is just trying to get an out-of-nowhere kill with Infect. And that's, again, it's the most popular way that it's used and can be very frustrating for people. Another way to use Infect is as a primary engine in a deck. I've already talked about my Yawgmoth deck on the channel. I've talked about my Hapatra Infect deck. And these are decks that use Infect very heavily as a way to try to take out other players, but it's just one of many mechanics in the deck. Yawgmoth uses a ton of proliferation and -1 counter synergies, and so does Hapatra, and Infect just happens to work its way in there. But there is another type of Infect deck, and in reality it's by far the weakest, but it can be one of the most fun, and that is the just old school dedicated aggro Infect deck. These decks work to play as many Infect creatures as fast as possible and use pump spells and combat tricks to try to go ahead, sneak in damage, and take players out fast. For anyone who has any experience with these, you don't tend to win very often with these decks. If you're playing a 1-on-1 or maybe in a 3-man pod, you got a pretty good shot. In a 4-man pod with a dedicated Infect deck like this, you're not going to win many games. Someone like me who doesn't really care about winning as much as creating a fun dynamic, fun Infect, you don't think those two go together, but it does create a kind of a cool dynamic at a table because it keeps people honest. The way Commander has evolved over the years, it's just leaned so hard towards the grindy value decks, essentially. People are either comboing off or they are ramping out of control. And there's so little pressure earlier in the game that players can just spend their first 3, 4, 5 turns either setting up their combo or just ramping out of control without making a board presence. I'm guilty of this a lot in some of my decks where I just know I got 4 or 5 turns to get set up. I really don't have to worry about combat hitting me in the face. And aggro Infect really does help to keep people honest. All of a sudden, they need low drop creatures. They need to worry about a board presence and not just setting up their game-winning combo for later in the game. Now, when it comes to picking a commander for your aggro Infect deck, the choices are sort of limited, just because there's been so few Infect creatures printed. The vast majority of Infect creatures you're going to find are either in black or green. That's the bulk of them. So you're going to want to have at least Golgari in your commander's color identity to go ahead and get the best access. Now, there's a bunch of really powerful commanders that utilize Infect, but some of them are hard to make dedicated Infect decks. Xenago's God of Revels is amazing as an Infect-focused commander, but there's really just not enough creatures in Gruul to go ahead and make a full-on dedicated Infect deck. Rafiq is one that used to be super popular as a commander and would be great for Infect, but you don't have that black and green. To go ahead and go full-on Infect again, you want at least Golgari. And in the case of this week's deck tech, we're actually going to go Abzan and use the partner pairing of Sidar Kondo and Tymna. These two commanders are just perfect. Neither of them say Infect on themselves, obviously, but they just work so perfect for an aggro Infect deck. Sidar Kondo is going to allow all your little Infect creatures, because Infect creatures tend to be very tiny, it's going to allow them all to swing in for the most part unblocked, unless people have a bunch of flyers. And unblocked Infect creatures just opens the door for your pump spells to take control and take people out. Tymna is amazing because one of the biggest problems with Infect is when you're using these pump spells, you lose card advantage so fast that you can just run out of gas. and maybe only taking one player out. With Tymna, it allows us to keep refilling our hand as we're swinging with these Infect creatures, so we don't lose that card advantage at fast and be able to refill our hands, and get back to being aggressive, not having to wait to build up our resources again. Now, we're going to obviously start with the creatures, and you don't really have a lot of choices. Like I said, there hasn't been many printed. When you put together these Infect decks, you essentially just run basically every creature in the colors you have that says the word Infect on it. You want a lot of creatures. We run around 30 creatures in the deck, and you're going to want as many creatures with Infect as possible. So you're basically, go to gather, type in Infect for the colors you want, and just put every one in the deck. Best part about a deck like this is those creatures are super cheap. Outside of maybe one or two of them, they're all going to be about $1 or less. They're super cheap, so the deck is pretty cheap to build. But I do want to highlight some of these, despite the fact that we are just stuffing all of the Infect creatures in here. There are some that are the most important of the Infect creatures, so if you do have a choice between a few, make sure these are in here. The first creature I want to point out is Hand of the Praetors. It is an Infect Lord, and as I've mentioned on this channel before, the phrase Infect Lord, there is no better phrase in all of Magic. It gives all your Infect creatures +1/+1, and on top of that, whenever you cast a creature with Infect, you get to hand out a poison counter. This is amazing, and you'll find this is one of the most important things in the deck, is being able to just place a poison counter. Because placing that poison counter is huge, because when you get later in the game, and after you've gone through that aggro stage of trying to get as many poison counters as possible, people might get stuck at 7, 8 Infect and have blockers all of a sudden. This is a great way to get around that and be able to spread that infection beyond just the initial attack that you were able to get on somebody unblocked. Icaras does a great job as well, because it gives everyone a poison counter upon entering the battlefield. Early game, it's great. It's a 3-drop. It gets in, it starts that poison engine going, but it's also a wonderful late game, because if someone gets stuck on 9 Infect, this is just a great finisher to go ahead and get to that 10. Another piece of Phyrexian perfection in this deck is Phyrexian Swarmlord. Phyrexian Swarmlord will allow you to just create a little army of Infectors. This can get insane, especially if you've gotten a couple opponents close to death. You typically want to go ahead and take them out one at a time, but if someone's at 8 and someone's at 4 or 5, you can get an army of these little Infect insects. And unlike with regular 1/1s, 1/1s with Infect are a whole lot scarier to deal with, especially when we get into our pump spells. If we can swing with 5 1/1s, if even one isn't blocked, we can pump that and get in for lethal. My favorite creature in the deck, zero surprises here, is going to be Skittles. Skithritz the Blight Dragon is one of the just most phenomenal pieces of Phyrexian perfection ever printed. It is a 4/4 flyer with Infect that can give itself haste and regenerate itself. This is just an Infector with flying and the possibility to give haste. You can come out of nowhere and hit somebody with this. Now, as you look through these creatures, you'll see I left out a lot of the higher CMC. There's no Blightsteel in here. There's no Phyrexian Juggernaut. There's a few other ones like that I did leave out. This deck wants to be low to the ground. Other than maybe 1 or 2, you want all your creatures to be, 1, 2, 3 drops, so you can get in there fast. If you opening hand have a bunch of 4, 5, 6 drop Infect creatures, that's not going to do you any good. You need to be able to get those low drops out fast, so that way when you're swinging on turn 2, 3, or 4, you can use that mana on pump spells because your creatures are already out. I am actually running 2 non-Infect creatures in the entire deck, and I might as well point those out because they do stand out. And they're Mentor of the Meek and Shalai, Voice of Plenty. We'll start with Mentor of the Meek. This is just a great card. So many of our Infect creatures are so tiny that, again, this will allow us to refill our hand. We're going to blow through resources quick in this deck. Mentor of the Meek does a great job of allowing us, if we get to the late game, and at least turn some of these tiny Infect creatures into card draw so we can get more resources. And Shalai is going to do a great job of making it very hard to remove our threats. It gives all our creatures hexproof. It gives us hexproof. And that's going to make sure that if we swing with an unblocked creature, thanks to our commander, and pump it, someone can't just target or remove it, that they're going to be stuck taking that Infect damage. These are 2 cards. You don't want to throw too many non-Infect creatures in the deck, period. At most, maybe 2, 3, or 4, maybe. You want basically all Infect creatures, but the utility these 2 offer is just too much to overlook. Now, the second most important category beyond the creatures is the instants. We want pump spells, and this is a super simple deck. It's not really complicated. We play little Infect creatures, we pump them, we watch people choke on poison. That's essentially the whole concept of the deck. I believe in the instant slot we have 7 or 8 pump spells, and that's really kind of, you want to have between, I'd say, 7 to maybe 11 pump spells in there, so you can almost guarantee that you're going to have at least one, because in opening hand, you need at least 1 little Infect creature and 1 little pump spell, so you can be set up to get in a position to take that first player out, because you need to do that fast, because again, 4-player game, you're not going to have much of a shot. Best pump spell in the deck, hands down, is Invigorate. This allows us to cast it for free if we control a forest. We're going to run plenty of basics in the deck, so that shouldn't be an issue. we can literally just have an opponent gain 3 life instead of paying its mana cost if we control a forest, and give a creature +4/+4. Their life total doesn't matter because of Infect, meaning this is just a free spell to throw on. This is phenomenal because we can use this in combination with other pump spells to get a really big, scary creature, or it could be in a turn where we wanted to play out another Infect creature to get more threats on the board, use our mana on that, and then just have the pump spell for free. With Invigorate, even if you're tapped out, they can't feel safe because you can still go and pump one of your creatures. The second one I have to point out is Stonewood Invocation. This card has split second and gives a creature +5/+5, and it gives it Shroud. That means if you swing it with the creature and it's not blocked, they might feel all safe because they can, oh, I'm just going to remove it. Well, no, they can't, because Stonewood Invocation is going to give it Shroud, pump it, and make sure with that split second that they can't counter it. This is a ridiculous effect, and it's one of the best feelings you can have, having a Stonewood Invocation with the creature swinging in unblocked. You're guaranteed to get a lot of damage through, and as you've known if you've ever played a Crossing Grip, people don't know how to respond to split second. It is, well, I guess you can't, hence the split second, but it catches people off guard when they otherwise feel safe, and that's kind of a lot of what this deck is trying to do. Card is phenomenal. Now with the enchantments, you're going to have some flexibility. You don't want too many enchantments because so much of our deck is dedicated to creatures and pump spells, but you do want to have some basics in either card draw or ramp. You got some options here. You're in white, so you have to run Smothering Tithe at this point. You don't really have much of a choice. No matter what deck you're running, this card is insanely powerful. But one that I love in this deck is Blind Obedience because it makes your opponent's creatures come in tapped. Nothing feels worse than when you're playing against an Infect deck and you have to play your creatures tapped. Because if all of a sudden you latch on to somebody and you swing at them, they can't even put blockers up to protect themselves. They have to remove your creatures. Blind Obedience only costs 2 mana on top of that. You can get in some great situations where you get some Infect creatures out early, drop the Blind Obedience, and your opponent just feels helpless. In the artifact slot, we're going to run some equipment and stuff like Boots and Greaves, give our creatures Shroud, Haste, that type of stuff to protect them. And again, Haste Infect is kind of important. Shroud is also great for our commanders. If we can get Sidar Condo out, it doesn't matter when in the game it is. If they don't have flyers, they can't block us. Also, stuff like Prowler's Helm works to just straight up make our stuff unblockable. That stuff is really, really important. Being able to get in for damage is huge. Now, in the sorcery slot, we are running a few board wipes. Now, it's funny, in a lot of creature-based decks, usually board wipes are not what you want because you're trying to flood the board with creatures. Board wipes are great for us, mainly because you're going to be drawing a lot of hate. And we don't really have the plan of, we don't want to just flood and get so many Infect creatures out that we're swinging with like a massive crowd of creatures. That's not really the strategy. We want to use both our commander and some of these tricky combat things to be able to sneak certain creatures through, as opposed to just swinging with a million creatures. So board wipes do a good job, whereas in a lot of token decks and a lot of creature-focused decks, I might just throw a couple board wipes in because I never want the board wiped. In here, board wipes are going to help us because, again, people are going to want to kill you, and the more you can keep the board under control, the better off you're going to be. Because you're better off with an Infect creature on a small board than 4 or 5 on a crazy board, because all your creatures are really, really tiny. One of my favorite sneaky cards for the deck, though, is going to be Caress of Phyrexia. This allows us to just give out 3 poison counters, which is insanely powerful. And as a backup, you can give them to yourself to draw cards. I know this is one of the cards I mentioned with Hapatra, and some of these cards are a little bit redundant with the Hapatra deck, but it's just too important to have something this versatile in a deck that's otherwise so focused on one goal. Now for the land base, it's going to be just a basic Abzan land base. There's no lands that really stick out for the deck. It is very helpful to be running lots of basics, shocks, and just things in general that come in untapped. We need to get our creatures out fast and start swinging, so playing lands that come in tap just really hurts us. Now that being said, budget's a thing, so running a few guild gates and stuff like that, sometimes you can't help it. It's a 3-color mana base, but for the most part, you want to make sure you have as many lands as possible that come in untapped, because we need to get our stuff out fast and get it going. We don't want to have turn 1 guild gate, turn 2 guild gate, turn 3 tri-land, or else in an aggro Infect deck, you might have just put yourself back too far to be able to get that first player out like you need to. Now that is going to do it for all the categories. It is time for the best part of every deck tech, the game-winning step. How are we about to win the game in this deck? Infect. And that is going to do it for this week's deck tech. I really hope y'all enjoyed this trip down to Phyrexia with me. This is a really fun deck to play. Now, if you only have one commander deck, probably not the best deck to have as your only deck, because friends are kind of a thing. But despite that, it is a super fun deck to play. And like I said, the way the format's going, it will, help to keep a lot of decks honest. Help to keep a lot of decks actually caring about the fact that they need a board presence and they can't just kind of ignore all that to go for their super rampy combo wins or whatever it is they're trying to do. Super fun deck. Obviously, it would just feel wrong not to shout out Mr. Infect himself, Craig Blanchett, anytime I do any sort of Infect deck. Those early episodes of Game Nights were really what got me into Magic and into Commander in the first place, and introduced me to the just perfect place that is Phyrexia. If any of y'all have any positive things to say about Infect, let me know down in the comments below. Might not be too much, but I promise you it is super fun, super fun, and it does add a cool dynamic, especially if you're playing with your friends. Playing with people you don't know out in the wild might not be the best first impression to make, but when you play with your friends, it mixes up that dynamic enough to make it really fun. And I've honestly had some of the most, especially Commander's a long game, you get some really quick-paced games in with it, mixes up the dynamic, and I really do think it's a good time to play these kind of decks. As always, a huge shout out to all the patrons. We love and appreciate y'all so much. I was super excited that I got to sneak in this little Infect deck tech because I know next few weeks are about to be crazy. Corey is coming soon. All the new Commander decks are coming soon. We're going to have way too many deck techs to do. Got to take a little detour to Phyrexia. But until then, I will see y'all next time.